which, if true, further raises the unanswered questions about how Scobie gained access to such sensitive and private correspondence. Hi, and thank you so much for joining me for another exciting episode of Unanswered Questions. Well, Omid Scobie and his mysterious sources. Now, Omid Scobie has never revealed the sources for his book, Endgame. However, he did reveal in an interview with The Times in 2023 that he shared mutual friends with Meghan Markle, and this has helped him in gaining information and being informed of breaking details. However, in the same interview, he did stress that he has never interviewed Harry or Meghan directly. So, in other words, we can safely assume that there was a go-between in the form of a mutual friend who delivered the information. Obviously, this matters due to the most contentious claim in Endgame, which was revealed in the Dutch version of the book, with the naming of King Charles III and the Princess of Wales as the royal races, the ones discussing Archie's skin colour. This information has been directly tied to letters that allegedly passed between Meghan Markle and her father-in-law, which, if true, further raises the unanswered questions about how Scobie gained access to such sensitive and private correspondence. Isn't it extraordinary that despite the sensitive nature of this information, to this day, no one has ever been held accountable? If we use a common sense approach, sadly lacking these days, I know, I assume it was either Meghan or Charles, the actual correspondence. And I don't think I need to spell out the most likely culprit or the one with the most to gain, do I? These letters were supposedly exchanged after the Oprah Winfrey interview, with Meghan raising the spectre of unconscious bias. Scobie declared, though, he did not have the actual physical letters and as such would be at risk of a libel claim under UK laws. So he couldn't risk naming names in the English publication. In other words, no physical proof. So he was presumably spun this story by an anonymous third party, a story that was designed to do maximum damage and feed him information that specifically targeted two individuals, two prominent royals. I find it very hard to believe that the then Prince Charles would ever commit any words to paper, especially if they were being sent in Meghan Markle's direction. I don't think he would be that naive. She had clearly demonstrated in the Oprah Winfrey interview that she was a foe, not a friend, and any expectation of honourable behaviour from her would obviously be misplaced. So let's go back now and examine the theories that were touted at the time of the book's publication about the source of Omid Scobie's information. First, palace insiders. Now, this was thought to be plausible because the information displayed an intimate knowledge of the royal correspondence. I don't think any palace insider would risk their reputation, their entire professional standing, to feed a then-failed royal correspondent juicy tidbits for his latest book. Next, ex-employees of the palace, disgruntled ex-employees of the palace. I guarantee if there were ex-employees willing to be an Omid Scobie source, I doubt they would have any access to the then Prince Charles's private correspondence. Then Harry and Meghan's former communications team. Well, if you can find any that haven't been dreadfully scarred by all the alleged bullying, not plausible. How could they get access to private correspondence? And if the palace was really that slack, why haven't we seen a steady flow of private correspondence being leaked to journalists over the last few years? Finally, a third party. Bingo! I am of the opinion that if there was a third party, they would have to be representing Meghan Markle. Why would any third party approach Omid Scobie on behalf of the then Prince Charles? It just doesn't make sense. A single palace source said at the time of the leak, and I quote, "It was a nasty and deliberate attack," end quote. And that is why it will never be forgiven. There will never be any reconciliation. The Dutch publisher called out Scobie's account of the leak at the time. He said it was factually incorrect, and he provided the information that the initial draft was from Scobie's agency, United Talent Agency, with the understanding that it would be updated at a future date. Now, this information appears to firmly suggest that the leak came from Scobie's side, but a thorough independent investigation would really have to be conducted to be really sure. Now, this might be a juicy project for one of the UK's highly respected intelligence agencies, because let's face it, it was a significant and targeted attack against the very institution intelligence services are charged to protect. Buckingham Palace reportedly launched an inquiry into the leaked letters, but no public findings have been published from that. But it was said that they suspected an external leak, possibly from the Sussex camp. However, like I said, no concrete evidence has been provided. But if we were to speculate that Meghan Markle was indeed a source via a third party for Omid Scobie, like she was for his first book, Finding Freedom, she would be guilty of leaking very sensitive and private information in order to directly harm the monarchy. Let that sink in. Deliberately raising racial tensions to cause harm, a very disloyal act, and one, if proven, she would never recover from. And that is why these unanswered questions matter. They cut to the heart of the distrust that exists between the Duke and Duchess of Sussex and the royal family. Now, if Harry and Meghan weren't involved in any way, a definitive public statement would go a long way to dispelling these speculations. They could go on the record right now, it's not too late, clearly stating that they had nothing to do with this leak. They could publicly distance themselves from Omid Scobie. They could declare that what he wrote wasn't true. After all, Harry's told us many, many times, silence could be regarded as complicity. So if we had to conclude that there was a third party or a mutual friend feeding Omid Scobie information, who was she? I don't know why I said she. It's just a gut instinct. It is interesting and unrelated that Omid Scobie goes to bat for Sarah Ferguson in Endgame, and I quote, "Sarah, Duchess of York, spent years being punished for speaking up about her divorce from Prince Andrew. She spent almost 30 years shunned and unforgiven for allowing someone to suck her toes 5 months after their separation." Now that sounds like someone who had the right to be aggrieved. 30 years of holding a grudge. However, that could just be me reading between the lines. Although the Dutch revelations were very clear and pointed, Omid Scobie did make a rather vague reference to the letters in the English publication, and of course he didn't name names due to libel fears. But this is how he presented it in the English version, and I quote, "The issues of unconscious bias may have been briefly discussed between Meghan and Charles over letter." Briefly discussed, may have been. Compare that to the Dutch version, where there was very specific passages identifying the two royals who allegedly discussed Archie's skin colour. On page 128, it was stated the private letters were exchanged between Meghan and the then Prince of Wales after the Oprah Winfrey interview concerning possible unconscious bias within the royal family. Now, Prince Charles was explicitly named, although to be fair, the point was firmly made in the book that he meant no ill will or bias. If that's the case, why put it in? What was the intent? My opinion is the intent was to inflame the royal racist row once more, to do some real damage and keep the hits coming and the pressure up. Later on page 334, a further reference was made to Charles, and it's implied that Catherine also took part in that conversation. Now, the reference to Catherine wasn't quite as explicit as the reference to Charles, but it was easy to understand the implication that she was the one involved in the conversation with the then Prince of Wales. There are other sources quoted in the book, sources close to Harry and Meghan. royal sources, which can be divided into two camps, I think. Those that work or have worked in the palace, and those that are actual members of the royal family. I'll say that again. Actual members of the royal family. And that should concern everybody. An example, direct quote from Endgame. More than 2 years on, no one other than Charles has spoken about the Archie conversations with the Sussexes, end quote. There's no way anyone could know that unless they were a member of the family, very intimate with the royal family, or Harry and Meghan themselves. Another example. The King felt that the Duchess of Sussex should discuss her feelings with the Waleses. 2 years on, and neither Harry or Meghan have received any word on the matter from William or Kate, end quote. Again, the only way that could be known and relayed to Omid Scobie would be from a member of the royal family or from Harry and Meghan themselves. He also wrote about the heated phone calls made with palace officials by a raging Harry, who wanted to wear his Blues and Royals #1 dress attire for the vigil for his grandmother. A family source told Scobie, and this is what they said. Some of these people are determined to make him feel like shit. Charming. Determined to continue punishing him for leaving its bullying, said a family source. Don't you think it's important that by this time this should be properly investigated and the family sources identified and shut down? Don't you think it's important that people should be held accountable? So until it is, it remains an unanswered question. Leave your comments in the comments down below and I will be very interested to read them, and I'll see you again very soon. Bye.